Hello, comrades. Welcome to this latest session in the LLA education series. This session has been planned and organized by the LLA Republican Labor Working Group. And it's a very good session. I think it's a very good initiative looking at the situation in Chile, where in December 2021, a new left-wing president has been elected, Gabriel Boric, and he's been part of the efforts to rewrite the constitution, which is a very interesting situation, very different from what the left is engaged in Britain for a number of reasons. Because, for example, for a start, we don't have a constitution here in Britain. I'm from Germany. There is a constitution that was written after the Second World War, which finds, all these things find reflection in the constitutions. So we want to find out how involved are the people on the left in Chile in not just discussing a new constitution, but perhaps a new social order altogether through these discussions. So we're very glad to have some good speakers on these issues and expert speakers on these issues. The first one to address the meeting is Steve Freeman from the LLA Education Group on Republican Labor.
Obviously, I'm going to concentrate more on the constitutional and political aspects because Victor and Carlos, they really know their stuff, obviously, about Chile. So I'm going to concentrate more on, in a way, trying to draw some parallels and differences between the UK and Chile. Now, the first thing I say is both countries, it seems to me, are facing a period of constitutional crisis. In October 2020, Chile voted by 78% for a constitutional assembly and for a new constitution. I'm not going to say much more about that. But this is a crisis, it seems to me, is coming from below, from a mass popular movement to create a new republic. In the UK, there's no such constitutional social movement, but there is a constitutional crisis. It's not coming from below, it's coming, as it were, from above. It seems to me it's in the form of a sort of psychodrama, a sort of nervous breakdown in the Tory party. King Boris, as we know, has all the kingly powers lent to him by Her Majesty, and he's being caught out lying about the cake that was presented to him by his courtiers in the palace at Downing Street there. And I saw yesterday, I think it was, Jacob Rees-Mogg, leader of the House of Commons and a self-proclaimed constitutional expert, declared that UK was now effectively a presidential system where the PM's mandate is personal rather than entirely party. So he concluded that a change of leader requires a general election. Now, so while a disinterested country is waiting with bated breath to see if the 54 Tory MPs will recall Johnson for re-selection by the Tory party in Parliament, the fate of the government is awaiting the outcome. Rees-Mogg is warning Tory MPs that they could face a general election and possibly lose their lucrative seats. So after being battered by the Tory whips, they're being bullied by the Constitution as well as wielded at them by Rees-Mogg. So I think whether you're in the UK or in Chile, we have to understand something about the Constitution. So I thought I would highlight quickly 5 points. First one being, the Constitution is about the rule of law because the Constitution is really the basic law of any country. That's the Germans use that basic law. It's the political laws. It's the law of laws. It's the supreme law of any country. However, as materialists, we don't rest content with a purely political and legal understanding of the Constitution. The modern Constitution is not simply the rule of law in the abstract, it's the rule of capital. It's not, as the bourgeoisie claim, a system of checks and balances to protect the rights of people. It's a system to protect the state from the people and ensure the hegemony of capital over wage labor. Second point. So the third point would be this. There are two ways to change the Constitution. First is constitutional reform, amending the existing Constitution. and second, by constitutional revolution that scraps or abolishes or overthrows the existing constitution. Fourth point, there are many kinds of republics. Just because we live in one kind of republic doesn't mean we can't have a different one, that we can't create a new republic. France has had 5 different republics starting in 1792. The 5th one started in 1958, I think it was, and it's still going on to the present. So they're waiting to get a 6th republic in France. So they've had 6, so we could certainly have a few. So we could count up those, how many republics. So, and then I think my last point is this, that loyalty is one of the central values of the Constitution. By that, I mean, loyalty to the Constitution is not simply loyalty to the rule of law, loyalty to the state, but loyalty to the political rule of capital. Now, just by way of example, I thought we'd consider the peculiar case of the UK Constitution, because I think we could call it, Tina said we didn't have one, I'm not sure. But anyway, I think it's a Heath Robinson type of contraption, a sort of genius of obfuscation and deception. So that's why Rees-Mogg, who loves it so much, it has the advantage of it. This legal abstraction takes the human form in the person of the Queen. She is in some ways the living embodiment of our ancient and unfathomable constitution. The monarch, like our constitution, has royal roots going back centuries, like the Queen. It's unchangeable, like the Queen. It stands above class politics, represents the nation, is non-political, and like the Queen, doesn't favor any class and has no selfish interests. Well, you can believe that if you want. But the importance is that loyalty to the Constitution and the rule of capital stand before us in the persona of Her Majesty. Now, the Constitution, it turns out, is at the heart of Labour values, because I've just, in the recent article, Labour's contract with the British people, Keir Starmer says, think of all the things to be proud of. What would they be? The rule of law, he says. Her Majesty the Queen, he says. Universal public services, he says, and the creative heritage, something patriotic at the end of it. The phrase that should jump out of us is rule of law and Her Majesty. So that's where we are. That's where we are here. So let us now turn to I thought I'd now consider the next point, really, which was the British and Chilean roads to socialism. So the British road to socialism was launched in 1950 with Stalin's approval as a program for the idea of a socialist left government, a left Labour government in alliance with the Communist Party of Great Britain, winning a parliamentary majority, becoming Her Majesty's government, and then introducing a series of socialist measures. I think, and people might argue with this, I think the high point of this strategy was 1981, when Tony Benn was challenging for Labour's deputy leadership and lost it only by 1%. During the 1980s, the British road died because, 1, the miners' strike, the defeat of the miners' strike, 2, the end of the Soviet Union, 3, the liquidation of the Communist Party of Great Britain. And then as we move into the 1990s, when Benn adopted a Republican policy, partially breaking with the British road to socialism, and then finally in 1995, when New Labour finished it off by ending Clause 4. So in 2015, then, the British road to socialism, I believe, made an unexpected comeback, now called Corbynism. The question is whether Corbyn is a loyalist or a Republican. You can answer that as you choose to think. But I think that it's an old strategy come alive again. If we turn to Chile, Chile had the same strategy called the Chilean road to socialism, came from the same route. And I was checking out an article by somebody called Rafael Rojas, who defined the Chilean road to socialism as the implementation of far-reaching social reforms without abandoning the constitutional framework. So he says, while the state took control of 90% of the banking assets through nationalizations, we're talking during the Allende period, of course, being Allende, never abandoned the constitutional framework of 1925. or altered representative government or the party system. So we've got this same idea of loyalty to the constitution that runs through or both of these particular strategies. The popular, I'm not going to talk about all the events of the 1970s, but just pick out some little constitutional points. Obviously, Chile was maybe Victor will tell us this, but anyway, so Chile was a long-standing republic. In 1970, Chile elected Salvador Allende as its 28th president, as the head of the Popular Unity government. And it turns out, and I didn't know this, on the 21st of December 1970, the newly elected president proposed an amendment to the Chilean constitution. And this amendment was to authorize the expropriation of the mining companies. And the Chilean Congress passed this nationalization amendment on the 11th of July, 1991. So here's a constitutional reform taking place in this process. So I'm going to skip ahead and miss out all the rest of it, but I am going to go to the 22nd of August, 1973, when the Chamber of Deputies charged the Allende government with breaching numerous sections of the Constitution. And it was a bit like Corbyn denying anti-Semitism. Allende denied the charge and made it absolutely clear he was loyal to the Constitution. 2 days later, General Augusto Pinochet was appointed defense minister and the army commander. And of course, about 2 weeks after that, on the 11th of September, Pinochet launched his military coup. I have the memory I have of that, and the thing that's in my mind, the thing that I remember is I have this memory from the news, from watching it on the telly, of Allende on the steps of the presidential palace. He either had a pistol or a rifle in his hand, and he was defending the Chilean constitution at the last. It's a dramatic picture, and I think, if I'm right, there were British-made jet fighters that had been delivered, were flying overhead at the time. Now that's the image that's never left me since that particular time. So it's fair to say that it was not just Allende who was ousted, not just the Popular Unity government that was overthrown, but the Chilean constitution itself. The republic was replaced by the dictatorship of Pinochet, obviously a brutal, murderous despot who ordered thousands to be tortured, murdered, or exiled. It was a constitutional revolution in reverse, i.e. a counter-revolution. And military dictatorship is ruled by violence without a constitution. And it turns out in 1980, Pinochet created and imposed a new constitution. Probably Victor will fill in more on this. But it's to think, I thought that the Pinochet Republic, if we want to call it that, was following the same path that Franco followed in Spain. Franco wanted to embed his politics into the Spanish state and constitution permanently. So he decided the best way to do that would be hand power to the constitutional monarchy in Spain, and thus never allow the return of the Spanish Republic. So the Pinochet Republic of 1980 was wanting to do something similar to what Franco was doing, to embed those neoliberal policies. And I won't go into the details of how these policies were embedded in the constitution. I'll skip that little bit. But there were many things contained within that constitution, including the upper house or Senate that had 10 permanent seats, including Pinochet himself. If he was not going to be a dictator ruling Chile, then he was going to be a senator with rights of veto. There was a referendum in 1988, which led to Pinochet's downfall, and a whole series of constitutional reforms, 42 I saw mentioned somewhere, 42 constitutional reforms, including in 2005 when Pinochet's seats in the Senate were abolished. It's nevertheless, it seems to me, proved extremely low and arduous task to reform the constitution. So between 1988 and 2020, the working class has been on a long sort of struggle to reform the Pinochet Republic and replace it with something new and democratic, defined by a new constitution. There are, of course, major events of struggle, and I have not talked about social struggles, economic struggles, class struggles. I've just completely not done that. But it's obviously, that's where the rocket fuel of constitutional change comes from. It comes from their people and their struggle. So I'm going to come towards the end of what I'm going to say here. The story I've just told is a constitutional story abstracted from the economic and social struggles of the Chilean people. It's a story about the British and Chilean roads to socialism as represented by the tragic and horrific story of Salvador Allende and our own Jeremy Corbyn, and the contrast of that with the Republican road currently developing in Chile, but not in the UK. It turns out we are living in a Tory Rees-Moggian republic, but don't worry, it's not the only kind of republic. We can change it if we try, and if we look to Chile, we can see how that could and can be done. So I'll finish at that point.
Thank you very much, Steve. That was an interesting start. I think it's quite unbelievable that the Pinochet constitution is still actually in operation in a country like that. I mean, after Germany lost the Second World War, that was the first thing that was done after that war. It's a different situation, of course, but it's quite interesting that it's still in operation. So our next speaker, Victor Figuera, is an expert on those issues. He's contributing editor of Alborada. He has a PhD in Latin American history and has written a book about Salvador Allende. We're very honored to have you with us, and welcome.
Thank you, Tina. As Steve was saying, Latin America and Chile is obviously part of Latin America, has quite a different constitutional, quite a different history with constitutions to the UK. In fact, Latin America has had, I think, more constitutions than any other part of the world. I think since independence, there have been something like 200 constitutions across Latin America. And Chile itself has had 4 since independence. So I think obviously that legacy gives the meaning of constitutional struggle a different flavor to the UK, where we haven't had any kind of constitutional struggle for a very long time, I wouldn't say. Steve was mentioning the 1925 constitution. This constitution came about actually in a similar situation to the situation that Chile is living at the moment. A deep social crisis, a political crisis, and an economic kind of crisis as well. And the result was a new constitution elaborated in 1925, which was a very strongly presidential system. And it was this strongly presidential system that gave the Chilean road to socialism its kind of meaning, I guess. They knew that if you could capture the presidency, you had almost unlimited powers. You know, there was very little the other institutions of the state could do in order to prevent you from doing what you wanted from the presidency. And so it was seen as a very flexible constitution, which is one of the reasons why the left didn't really have put a lot of emphasis on the constitutional issue in the development of the coalitions that brought Allende to power in 1970. Now, obviously, when Allende comes into government, as Steve said, he did propose some constitutional amendments, and there were several amendments at the end of the 1960s and in Allende's government, which tried to even out this situation of presidential power. So they gave Congress a little bit more power. They also gave the president the right to call a plebiscite on an issue. And Allende really, when he first comes in, was going to use a constitutional reform in order to link the nationalizations issue, the copper and so on, to a resolution of the potential political stalemate that could happen in Congress. It didn't prosper. The parties of the Popular Unity weren't particularly keen on it. There was a lot of there were risks involved. It would have to go through Congress. Congress would determine the nature of the question to be asked of the population. So they decided not to risk it, ended up not prospering. In the middle of his government, Allende then proposed an outright constitutional blueprint in order to resolve the stalemate that was occurring in his government. And this is actually it doesn't survive as a full document, but what we know of it shows an outline of what a transitional constitution could be between a kind of underdeveloped capitalist system and a social and a system that is trying to transition towards socialism. Again, this doesn't prosper, and his last effort, kind of constitutional reform, is actually just a referendum on his government shortly before he's overthrown. And when he's overthrown, interestingly, one of his assistants was carrying the Chilean Declaration of Independence in her sleeve, and it was torn out of her sleeve by a soldier and ripped into shreds. It's very, very symbolic. And I think, you know, that is really, it's the end of Chilean independence in many ways, which we then see institutionalized in the Pinochet constitution that comes next. Now, when Pinochet comes into power, he has an economic project that is landed on him by the Chicago boys that some of you may have heard of. But he doesn't have a political project. And first, he has to get rid of his competitors in the junta. So he gets rid of the Air Force general that was a big competitor. And once he's done that, he begins to institutionalize his regime through the 1980 constitution, which is enshrined in a referendum, but obviously at the barrel of a gun. And this constitution is interesting because what it does is really, its purpose is to prevent a popular unity ever from happening again. You know, the elite has had a very narrow shave and a very close shave, and they want to prevent something like that from happening. So it enshrines a political system that is designed to prevent the creation of a strong left-wing alliance that would take power. It does this through an electoral system, designated senators that Steve was talking about, a national security council, and so on and so forth. But it also builds a legal framework around an economic system and around the way the state is understood. And it does this by ensuring that you can't nationalize natural resources. You can't nationalize education. You know, there are limitations to how you can carry out healthcare and so on. And so essentially it's a straitjacket to enshrine a model which is very favorable to imperialism, very favorable to the Chilean elite, and which prevents a popular unity from ever happening again. As Steve pointed out, there were a series of reforms to this at different stages, but you know, they get rid of Pinochet being a president until 1997, for example. This is a direct result of the popular struggle through the 1980s. And then later, you know, they get rid of the designated senators and the binomial system, which ended in 2015. But it's this straitjacket that led us directly into the estallido, the uprising of 2019, because successive mobilizations around different causes all came up against this brick wall of a constitution that was designed to prevent change. Now, how did the Chilean left manage to make constitutional change such an important part? Why was that the response of the social movement after the estallido? I think, you know, it's because it had been a central demand of the left in Chile, particularly those, first of all, in the struggle against the dictatorship. The legitimacy of the 1980 constitution was not recognized until the development of the Concertación, and where the Socialist Party essentially betrayed the rest of the left and said, okay, we'll accept this as long as we get to be in the government. So there's been a very long-standing resistance to this constitution. But there are other factors that I'm sure Carlos will go into in his presentation. One of them, I think, is that there was a consistent linking of the day-to-day, the social problems that people were encountering, the socioeconomic difficulties that people were having, with a constitutional, structural cause. So there was always this relation going on. You want more money for education? We need to nationalize copper. We need to nationalize copper. We need to change the constitution. It was this consistently. And for years, nobody listened. My first visits as a younger man to Chile, people would be like, la Constitución, the constitution, who cares? It's a very long way away, it's very far. But it's a drip, drip, drip. Generations of activists going through, becoming less active later maybe, but still conceiving of the need for a constitutional change. Other issues, for example, the legacy of the struggle against the dictatorship, which had, you know, profound impacts on a whole generation. Being part of the system, being in the system, sorry, but not part of it. And this is something that I think the Communist Party was particularly good at in Chile. So, for example, Chilean politicians earn something in the region of £12,000 a month, but the Chilean Communist politicians earn a stipend from the party that is equivalent to the income of the average skilled laborer in Chile. So they're in the system, but they're not of the system. And I think this kind of measure is crucial if you're trying to connect with people and then you want them to listen to you about reforms. Because these are, after all, reforms that you would potentially, could be argued, stand to benefit from as a part of the political class. There was also the fact that the left has always used constitutional reform as a mobilizational tool. For years, you know, there have been initiatives to get people talking about how they would run the country. How would you rewrite the rules of this country? And after the estallido, this came into full effect with the cabildos, these little neighborhood groups that got together and wrote articles of a new constitution, discussed how they wanted feminism to be in the constitution and so on. This is a way of allowing people to imagine themselves in control. And I think that is a hugely important lesson of the Chilean. It's not an elitist politics. It's asking ordinary people, how would you do it? What do you think is important? We don't do that in the UK. It's always done up there. I think there was an element of this in John McDonnell's discussions around the Green New Deal, but it didn't go so far as opening the whole Pandora's box of what kind of rule book we need for the UK. And then I think there are all kinds of things like never forgetting the linkages with educated youth, you know, the importance of having a consistent message and constantly bringing educated youth into a systemic critique and highlighting to them the importance of a constitutional change. And I think you can see that in the new generation of Chilean politicians. And I think I've probably gone on for quite a while there. We can cover other issues in the Q&A, but I think that gives you a kind of idea of some of the background and some of the ways that the Chilean left has made constitutional change central to the agenda in Chile today.
Brilliant. That was really fascinating. Thank you very much, Victor. I think you're spot on to say, if you give people an idea about how things could change in society, they become involved in it and they become interested in issues like they're ruled. Crucially important if you're serious about socialism. Our next speaker is Carlos Gonzalez. Hello, comrade. He is a former political prisoner under Pinochet, and he's a member of the Collective of Democratic Unity and the Chilean Assembly in London. And perhaps you could tell us quickly what those two are as well, because I don't really know. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here. As you can see, the issues are enormous and very complex as well for us and for British as well, obviously, even more. The Asamblea de Londres is the group that got united immediately after the 18th of October was called the protests in Chile, yeah? And we got organized here, and it is a very assorted assembly of people coming from my background and the younger of the old people who came here as a refugee. But there are a lot of others that have been coming here to study here, new students at university and so on and so forth. So we were kind of united in different generations in order to work in solidarity with our people fighting in Chile, basically. I'm going to talk a little. I'm also part of the United Front in Chile, the Social Front, which is a collection of organizations and unions and all that. And I represent the people from outside the country there. What I'm going to do is just a little bit kind of context of what's happening now. It will be devoid. There will be just a few comments on that, but I will try to kind of put it all this we have been talking at the moment in context. There have been immediately after the 18th of October popular revolts, three main aspects of this life in Chile start being simultaneously kind of being developed. One, as a result of the protest, a plebiscite was proposed to change the constitution. That was in November of that year, 1918, to replace the Pinochet constitution. Was still, unbelievably or not, still there. And as you know, Pinochet 1980 constitution is foundational basis for neoliberalism in Chile. Basically, that's the key law that keep that together in Chile, basically. So if you want to nationalize the copper mines or whatever, you can do that because it is rigged in such a way, the constitution, that you can do that, okay? So the new constitution is being discussed at the moment, and it will be put to the vote this year around September. So that's one aspect, this whole aspect of that. A new general election of parliament and local authority happened at the same time, more or less in last year, and also the election of the president of Chile to replace President conservative Sebastián Piñera. You know? So all these three aspects kind of are quite intertwined in the life of Chileans. Apruebo Dignidad, which was the coalition that attempted to reunite the left into a larger conglomerate, which it did, in the midst of the pandemic. There was a series of different attempts to do that. So finally, the platform led by left-wing parties and movements were formed in order to push left of the center the economic proposal of the Congress. After successful constituent elections, party confirmed the president of the presidential primary for Gabriel Boric. He won an election, a primary election against Daniel Jadwe from the Communist Party, and he went to the elections for the November elections for president. Gabriel Boric got around 25% of the vote, and against a right-wing candidate which got 27%. That worries quite a lot the left. So for the second part of the election, the left and many other people are united in electing Gabriel Boric by a majority of 55%. The worrying part being that the right-wing parties, in a way, the current parties, they were quite they did quite well, quite bad in the elections. So they left the way open to the ultra right wing to be part of the election, and they got more than 40% of the vote. So at the moment, Chile, the voting population, it is quite split in two bits, with a large majority, important majority for Boric in the left, but with an important number of votes for the right wing. 8.3 million people voted. Probably was the most number of voters we have from ever. And within the vote, we can say that on the second installment of the elections, about 1 million or almost 1 million new voters came to the election, many, much of them women and young people. So it's kind of a really important aspect of this election. I was going to talk a little bit about the Apruebo de Dignidad, the front that it is composed basically by a broad front parties and the Communist Party. After the election, when Boric was elected, obviously Chileans have to confront the situation of the elections in the parliament. Unfortunately, the parliament elections were quite even. So we are quite much even between the forces of the left and the center and the right. So it is almost 50-50. So the position of changing or putting new laws to the parliament, it is a problem at the moment for the government of Boric. Boric's government is a transitional government. It's not a revolutionary government. It's going to change. It got a policy of changing aspects of the economy, aspects of the trying to get some new rights for people to education and health, and without the support of the Congress will be quite difficult to and it's going to be. At the moment, Boric announced his new government last week, and he announced his first 24 ministers. One of the particular thing on that is that 14 women are part of the main body of ministers in there. 14 women against 10 men, but also it is a government composed by some figures of the center as well. So such as the new minister for the Treasury Minister, which was currently just before, until last week, the president of the central bank. So it's supposed to be a socialist, but it will be hard proof if he's going to go with the main plans of Boric government of abolishing neoliberalism. So this is some of the things we are looking forward for the future. We'll put a few other things probably, or we'll put some other things within the discussion, but the things that I need to say here is that, like in Chile, people kind of, as Victor said, kick the Pandora box and open it, and everything start coming out there. This is what needs to be done here as well. I mean, there are quite important fights at the moment done by British people in terms of the environment, and that need to be forwards. But the movement needs to be more politicized. I think that's the thing. It's what happened in Chile. Chile had been for 30 years, 40 years after the coup, devoid of this political discussion, and that wasn't. So people have been now, especially through the discussion of the new constitution, found a new voice and been putting forward new ideas of how the Chile we want for the future need to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, comrade. That was very enjoyable introductions by all three speakers, I think. We have at the moment nobody with their hand up. Comrades, if you have a question or want to make a comment, please indicate by clicking the raise hand button. There's been a few comments in the chat though, which I'm going to read out, and perhaps comrades, speakers could actually take some notes of that and start to answer it, or even when you disagree with each other would be interesting to hear or want to supplement something. So Mike is asking, the whole idea of a constitution has always been a mechanism by which the ruling elite controls the mode of production. Why do revolutionaries fight to change it rather than dismantling it altogether? The question is how you dismantle a constitution, I mean, revolution, obviously, but if there's not a revolutionary situation, but put that to the panel. Carlos says, Daniel Jadu, sorry, I don't know how to pronounce him, was the obvious choice for the left. Boric is compromised and has a history of batting for the wrong side. However, he's not in government of his own, which is, of course, Carlos mentioned that. Any other questions? Okay, I'll leave it at these first. So perhaps if those three speakers want to discuss those, that would be interesting. How about Victor? I bring you in first, if that's okay.
Okay, thanks, Tina. Okay, well, on the issue, on the question around constitutions, it sort of made me remember Lenin, I guess, when he talks about the revolution having, two components, the democratic revolution and the socialist revolution. And, the constitution is a rule book, right? That's why socialist states through history they've developed their own constitutions. But the question is, that's a constitution, for a socialist society where arguably the working class holds power, right? But what about a rule book for a transition from a capitalist, dependent capitalist system, or an imperialist capitalist system like we have in the UK, towards something that is moving away from that? And I think that's why in places like Latin America, you do see that the political struggle contains this constitutional component, because they recognize that the rule book by itself can be a tool of political and social struggle. Firstly, as I was pointing out, by mobilizing people around structural change, but also because if you can then define the rule book, you can then force the opposition to play according to your rules. And I think if we look at the constitutions of Venezuela, Nicaragua, Bolivia, for example, they have shown their efficacy at defending a revolutionary process from the efforts of local elites and imperialism to overthrow them. So I think it's worthwhile pushing for this constitutional reform, because what we're really arguing for, if we're engaging in the political system, is reform of the economic, social, political structures of the country, and a rule book, it gives a format for doing that within. On the question around Boric and his batting for the wrong side, I mean, I think one of the things is that he comes from a new left, like you had the old left and then you had the new left in the 60s, which was still ideologically, Marxist, still concerned with revolution. This new left is kind of millennial, right? They're anti-capitalist, but they're not necessarily socialist. And so their discourse around things like human rights, around some of these big issues, is, I would say, I would argue slightly mistaken. But I think that his main issue at the moment, Boric is a transitional president. His role is going to be to see in a new constitution. And I think that in foreign policy, he will keep his head down for a while, at least until Lula is elected, if Lula is elected in Brazil.
Thank you. We've got a couple of comrades now who want to come in. Sorry, John Tumman first. Can you switch on your camera, please? While you're doing it, I'm actually going to ask Norman to come in first then. Okay, Norman, you are.
Can you hear me and see me?
Yeah, I can hear you and we can see you.
Victor says that if you have a constitution, that's a rule book which forces people to do what you want them to do, keep to the rules. But it ain't necessarily so, really. If you look at the 1936 Constitution in the USSR, if you've ever looked at it, it's the most perfect constitution that probably anyone ever imagined. Freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom to practice whatever religion you wanted, and so on and so forth. But it was never put into practice. No one, I don't know if anyone in the USSR tried to implement it, but it certainly was never implemented. So there we've got an example of a constitution that was completely worthless. And I'm not saying that this necessarily applies to all constitutions, but it does suggest that constitutions are not necessarily as strong as you might think them to be.
Thank you, comrade. John, please. I've asked you to unmute. Oh, you got it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tina. Yeah, the last comment I thought from Norman was something that I disagree with. I think that what was wrong with the 1936 Constitution was the power that it gave to to Stalin himself and the people immediately around him. So I mean, there are certain things that go into a constitution. There's not only the rights of the citizens, but the responsibilities of the citizens, and also the makeup of the democratic assemblies, if there are any, and how they are to be elected, by what mechanisms, and what the relationship of the executive arm of government is to that legislature. And I think you'll find that the 1936 Constitution actually was the instrument by which Stalin continued to rule. And that it was revised precisely in order to ensure that. But my question is this, that from what I've gathered from the three speakers, there's this at least a couple of decades, if not longer, single issue campaigns and fightbacks of the people of different kinds kept on coming up against this wall called the Pinochet Constitution. And only gradually, it seems, began to all accept that it was the constitution that needed to change, that they could not make social progress or economic progress without radically reforming that constitution. Now, my question is this: because of the situation which we face now in Britain, in that process that took place in Chile, were there sections of the left that realized the constitution was so important at such an early stage, at a relatively early stage? And what did those sections of the left do in order to convince the rest of the left and the single issue campaigns that what needed to be changed was the constitution? What did the process look like that, or was it something more inchoate than that? I don't really know enough about Chilean history between the Pinochet in the Pinochet period and in the 21st century to actually answer that question myself. So I'm sorry it's a bit complex, but that's my question to the panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. I also have a couple of questions. I'm using the chair here. So I found it fascinating how Victor was describing how people were getting more and more involved and wanting to take the Constitution seriously. How does the popular uprising find reflection in the Constituent Assembly? Has that, presumably that was elected a while back. How is it being put together? You know, is it just the sort of the parties as they are in Parliament? How is it put together? Are there new disputes opening up now? You know, you're saying that it will come to a vote in September. I mean, will the democratic demands from below find reflection? I mean, I presume a workers' representative on a workers' wage will not be part of that constitution, though I do like that the Communist Party is actually sticking to it. You know, how do you characterize what the constitution is probably going to look like, and how do they deal with differences in the Constituent Assembly? You know, especially if there's now a new movement from below, presumably pushing for more than, you know, was even granted last year or would have been granted last year. How is that reflected, and do people hear about it? Is that all reported quite openly and democratically? Do people get involved? You know, is there an open debate on these, or is it all quite sort of hidden away? That's sort of what I'd be interested to know. I've got no hands up anymore, so I would suggest that we bring in, oh, hold on, there is a, no, that is Carlos's hand here. Okay, Carlos wants to come in, good.
Thank you. Yeah, there are a couple of things need to be known about the process for the new constitution. One, that the plebiscite was won by 80% of the population, 80% of the voting population voted for change. So definitely there was big mandate there for change. The second aspect, when the Constitutional Assembly members were elected, again, the right wanted to take around a third of the members in order to boycott the whatever was going to be discussed there, and they couldn't. They couldn't get that. So again, the second aspect is that potentially there is a majority of people from the left or that will support changes in the constitution. But on the other hand as well, the political party, and this is connected to some of the questions in terms of how the political parties were involved. Many people in Chile rejected the political parties because of that. Some of them were really involved, as Victor said at the beginning, with the involved within the constitution of Pinochet. They agree with that in order to get into government. So many people suspected of them, so there were a kind of a great number of the new Constituent Assembly members elected from independent groups. So this is something that colored the whole process as well. So it is that. I don't know, Victor, want to say something on that as well?
Okay, Victor,
Yeah.
do you want?
Well, I guess in terms of, I mean, the fact that there's so many of them are independents does mean that there, you know, it does seem that there's quite a lot of debate around, you know, exactly what they should be doing. There was quite a lot of debate at the beginning around what the rules, the constitution for the Constituent Assembly would be. That took a couple of months for them to sort out. In terms of what the new constitution will look like, I mean, we know they've already said a few things about what they want in there. So we know it's going to be green in some ways. You know, they're talking about the right to water. We know it's going to be feminist it wants to re-envision the Chilean state as a feminist state, which would mean judicial reforms, educational reforms, and so on. It wants to be plurinational, or rather, these are the kind of ideas that are dominant within that independent sector of the social movements that are represented in the assembly. It wants to be plurinational. In other words, it wants to re-understand Chile in a similar way to Bolivia, the way Bolivia talks about itself, a state that isn't just made up of one nation, but of several nations, which have unique rights and responsibilities in relation to the whole. And this is particularly about the indigenous peoples. Then there's a state role in the economy, which we don't know exactly what that will look like and whether it entails any kind of creating the framework for nationalizations. But I think that is essential if you want to have a green economy in Chile. You need to give the state a role in the economy. And then I think there's going to be some level of restitution for the victims of the estallido. So there'll be institutional reforms will be part of that in terms of the police in particular. But I don't see how you can have restitution for the victims of the estallido and then not have restitution and forgiveness for the victims of the dictatorship, but also forgiveness for those who struggled against the dictatorship, who, particularly those who took up arms against it, who are still considered terrorists today and aren't allowed to go home. So I think, there's a legacy that still needs to be dealt with. Someone was talking about...
Victor, can I just ask you quickly, somebody put in the chat here, I'd like to know what Victor means by a feminist state.
Well, I think from what I can tell, what they mean is like what they call paridad, having equal representation in institutions, but also having specific institutions for women. But I haven't gone into that in any detail, but I know that's the sense that I get. They're also talking about Boric's government, having a feminist foreign policy. So I'd need to look into that a little bit more, I'm afraid. Then earlier, someone was talking about like constitutions being paper and, basically you can ignore them at your will. Well, I think, not to get into those old debates about Stalin or whatever, but the Soviet Union lasted for quite a lot longer than Stalin. It had another constitution afterwards. I think it was, 1977 or something. And I think any constitution is sustained by the social forces that mobilize around that constitution. And that's what happened in Bolivia in 2019 and 2020, when they managed to overthrow a coup that had overthrown a socialist government there, using a constitution that had been developed after 2005. And the same in Nicaragua and Venezuela as well. So constitutions are paper, but they also can give life or they can be used by social movements to legitimate the actions that they're taking in order to defend themselves from aggression. And then there was a question about identity politics in the chat. I guess I think what I mean is, I don't think that's a problem. I think that what it means is that they're slightly less focused on the issues of imperialism than the old left, as it were, would have been. So the old left understands the world as a world of structures and structures of power. And imperialism is one of those structures, and it has economic elements, political, etc., cultural elements. And this new left is kind of not really there with that. They're more interested in other issues. That doesn't mean that they're not anti-imperialist, but I just think it's not a central part of their thinking at the moment, at least.
Thank you, comrade. Okay, Steve, you wanted to say something as well?
Mute myself. Yeah, obviously, I agree with a lot of the things that are being said. There's a couple of muting myself. There we go. Sorry. Just pick up on a couple of points. There is this whole thing about, you might argue that wages are part of the exploitation of the working class. Well, why do we want to fight for higher wages? Why do we just say, let's abolish wages and be done with it? Why not go to the picket line with a big placard going, down with wages, we're not having any more of this? And you realize why that wouldn't catch on a lot, because it misunderstands that the class struggle is not about making the correct words on a placard, but actually it's the working class fights for change. Working people don't necessarily want revolution, but they do want change. They know the situation that they're living in. They want social reform, they want economic reform, and they want to go out and fight it. So that's where the masses go. And as socialists, we don't go, well, we've got our placards going down with wages. No, we participate in those struggles, but hopefully to try to take them in a different direction. Hopefully we could take something ourselves politically to those struggles that takes them in a different direction. So down with wages isn't a great idea, even though we as communists might believe, well, eventually under communism, there won't be wages. You know, there will be the abolition of wages. And it's the same thing, you know, why not abolish capitalism tomorrow? Why keep it a day longer than that? Let's just abolish it and be done with it and not mess about anymore. It's the same sort of argument. So it's to do with mass consciousness, and it's about winning the majority of the working class to a process. And Carlos said something very important, I think, that struck a note with me, that more people came into the elections. More people started voting. I mean, many working class people don't vote because they know there's little point in it. They're disillusioned with it. So if more people come to the elections, at some point they're starting to think, hey, maybe we can change something here. Maybe there is something political going on. Maybe we should go out and vote. Maybe we should get more active politically. That's a fantastic sign. If you look at what the masses are doing and what they're voting or being demoralized or whatever, that's where you have to take your clue. Now, the point about the Constitution, a Constitution is word. You don't have any illusions in words written on a piece of paper. It's always about the social content of what the real power is. It's not whatever, you know, we could have a perfectly written Constitution, but if the power, and my argument was, of course, that in most of the times, the Constitution is about the power of capital. It's just expressed through the Constitution. It's expressed through the laws that they've got. But if you had a genuine democracy, the substance of that Constitution would be the power of the democratic power of the working class. And in which case the things written on paper would be implemented, because the power would be with the people to implement the things they'd written on the paper. In the Stalin's Constitution, the people were powerless. So you could write what the heck you like on paper, but Stalin was actually in charge of what was going on. So don't be, you know, words are important. We want to write and express ideas in words, but we've not got illusions in words. Now, I think, just going on, for us, a democratic republic is not a presidential republic. A democratic republic is the idea ultimately the power comes from below. The real democratic republic is the self-empowerment of the working class. So the kind of republic we might be thinking about, something more like the Paris Commune. No, we didn't get to that all in one go, but the Paris Commune had many great ideas within it about sovereignty below, about people being elected, accountable, subject to recall. And somebody, I can't remember which comrade was mentioned, the Chilean Communist Party only taking the average wage and connecting to the people. So, you know, that's what we have to do. We have to go through these struggles. So one of my questions, I suppose, and one of my thoughts is, what class forces are in the Constituent Assembly? Because that is a site of class struggle itself. It's a site of where people come together with politics to try to fight it out. And how does that connect with a mass movement outside, on the streets, in the factories, etc. And for me, if people, as they do in this country, simply accept the Constitution, and then one day they think, you know what, we could change the rules, that is a huge step forward. People here just think, well, what is we don't know what the Constitution is, it's just the rules, we'll do what we're told. We don't even have the idea that we could change anything politically, that we could actually change our Constitution. And that's not a sign of how politically conscious we are, it's a sign of how, in some sense, how backward we are, because we've never thought the Chilean people are trying to change the rules. We'd never dream of doing that here. We just like the rules that there are. Let carry on. Let Jacob Rees-Mogg, you know, write the rules, or let's have the rules they had in 1688, or whenever it was that some dead people wrote our Constitution. So I think that's where we have to go. A republic for us has to be about democracy. That has to be about the power being not just on paper, but in the organization, the democratic organization of the working class, of millions of people. And that's what we have to relate to, those millions of people. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Okay, I suggest we do another round of questions. Well, there is only one question actually, but another round from the panelists to perhaps also sum up then. Hold on, there's one more person who wants to speak. They're always leaving it to the last second. Okay, Russell coming in now. And I'm reading out a question by Esther Giles. She's saying, I understand Victor is making a distinction between the old left, that on question of imperialism, and the new left that deals with mainly other issues, but not quite clear as to whether this represents a real shift in political analysis. Does this represent a shift from material reality to identity politics? She asks. Okay, Russell, I'm trying to make you into a panelist. You'll have to accept. There you are. Okay, then please switch on your camera, and then we can see you.
Sorry, I didn't realize that I had to click join as panelist.
All right, that's okay.
I didn't want to intrude, but my question relates actually to the last point you made about the Victor's reference to the this new movement not being so concerned or preoccupied with imperialism and being more preoccupied with other issues. Of course, the thought that immediately sprung up in my mind was, unfortunately, until it's too late, once they get overthrown by imperialism, then they may have to occupy themselves with the whole question of imperialism and what actually happened. So, my question is that if we don't learn the lessons from history, we condemned to repeat our mistakes, and it seems quite extraordinary to me that a movement, if you want to call it that, a movement in Latin America should be so, how can we say, so relatively unconcerned with the determining role that imperialism has played and continues to play in the future of that part of the world, and Bolivia being a perfect example of the fact that imperialism is alive and well and kicking and determining the future of Latin America.
Thank you, comrade. We also have another question now from Marie, or comment. I'll bring you in.
Hello. Yes, it seems to me that what the friend Mike Craig raised was at the center of this discussion. That he was saying, well, what's the point of the Constitution? It's only just a piece of paper. And what Steve answered is that it's only a piece of paper if there is not the force behind from the population to actually make it implemented, to have it implemented. And I think that to go back to Chile and with Allende, what Steve said in the beginning was very important. But what was wrong with Allende was that he had been loyal, however genuinely humane and humanistic he was loyal. He remained loyal to the Constitution. And so he remained prisoner of the police and the army, particularly the army. And he had the illusion in the army, and then put this man who was going to overthrow him, put him on the pedestal, thinking that he was going to win that sector of the army, and there was a lot of people from the army who were won, and so the answer would have been, it seems to me, was to appeal to the soldiers and to the working class, and to organize links between the working class and the soldiers, the good soldiers, and to start making organizations in the population for the defense of the revolution, instead of promoting this man in the hope, Pinochet, in the hope that he was going to be won or to be silenced. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, comrades. So I suggest we're doing now a final round with the main speakers. And I suggest we're starting with the other way around that we did earlier. So Steve, well, that is the same way around. Steve first. Go on, Steve.
Okay, all right. I think a question. Okay, I'm going to do more British than Chilean lessons. All I'll say something about that. I think the question for us here in the UK, the big question we're trying to do in the post-Corbyn era, is to ask ourselves whether Corbyn had the right strategy, but he made some tactical mistakes. In other words, if he hadn't made those tactical mistakes, keep the same strategy going, and then it will be okay. Now, what we're suggesting, what I'm suggesting anyway, is that the strategy that Corbyn had was flawed. The strategy that he was adopted has something to the British road to socialism, to the idea of loyalty to the crown in Parliament, to the Constitution. That's the strategy that he had. Now, he never got to Allende's position of being the prime minister, so he never got overthrown or anything like that. It didn't happen to him. He never got there. But I think there's I think if we learn from the bitter experience of the Chilean people, there is something to say there that we have to apply here in this country. Corbyn's strategy was wrong, not just his tactics. And you can't really judge ultimately tactics if tied to one strategy. And that strategy was really the revamping of the British road to socialism, the rebuilding of what we call the social monarchy, you know, not doing constitutional stuff. But the Chilean people have shown us we need to do it. Now, the Chilean people have understood that, it seems to me, because they have suffered so much over this period of time. The people have suffered, and even if they were depoliticized under the regime, you know, the consciousness was taken away from them by the regime, it seems to me, and the comrades will tell me if I've got completely wrong in this, that they would quickly come to understand, they would learn from that historical experience and come to the conclusion, you know what, we need democracy, we need a constitution, we need to go down this road towards a new republic. That's what and they've come to that conclusion because of the pain and loss that they have suffered in the terrible history that we can see here, sitting here safely, as it were, in England. And the people in Spain have got a similar thing, because they also suffered massively from Franco. And republicanism will come back to Spain precisely because the same lessons will be learnt by the people in Spain as well from that. And we have to learn those lessons before it's too late, not when it is too late to learn those lessons. So we need to have a real serious think about Corbyn's strategy and whether his strategy is right, and learn, see what's happening in Chile and learn from that. That's what we have to do. You know, and that to me means there is a road in Chile towards a very democratic, a fully democratic republic. Whether this government or this will get people there, I don't know. That's a matter of the class struggle in Chile and how it all pans out. But which I you know, I'm not understand properly, or I'm fully aware of what's actually going on the ground. But that is the strategy towards a democratic and social republic. In other words, a republic which is fully democratic and has social and democratic rights for the Chilean people. I think that's what's appealing, and that's where the battle lines should be drawn.
Thank you, Steve. I'm bringing in Carlos because he hasn't.
Thank you very much. One of the things to say here is that the Chilean process for Allende government was a long one. Started in the 30s with the popular fronts everywhere, and it was a constant struggle to get together the working class until the Socialist Party and the Communist Party got together. They could elect Allende in 1970. So it was a process, long process, and with the parties fully embedded on the class struggle, on the unions, etc. No, on the 68, similar to Europe, Chile have big fights in the universities, and the university reform happened in 68 and things like that. So this contributed to the whole election of Allende. It was put by the coup out, but the process, I tend to believe that still we are in the process of the same, that the left trying to get into government. In the 1990s, the Chilean Communist Party proclaimed that the real key aspect of fight was between democracy against neoliberalism. 1990s, and 30 years so later, we are kind of getting there a little bit with the election of Boric. So that's what I would like to say.
Thank you very much, Carlos. Victor, please.
Thank you for the questions, and I think Carlos's very good points just there. I realized that I didn't answer one of the questions from the earlier round. I think one of the things here is we have to look at, when we're talking about social forces and constitutions, got to see them as sites of contestation. They are not just the products of the elite, they're also the product of the historical struggle of the working class to wrest concessions from that elite. And that's certainly the way that Allende saw the Chilean constitution. Now, I think in the UK, we have an absence of a rule book, and that leads to confusion. The working class doesn't really know what it means, needs to change. It doesn't understand the role of the Queen in this structure. It doesn't understand anything because the rules aren't written down anywhere. So you've got nothing to refer to. They don't even know their own rights, because there's no Bill of Rights, for example. And I think it's a shambles that the left in the UK kind of left this issue for the Lib Dems to bring up when they were talking about, proportional representation a few years ago. That should have been seen as the thin end of the wedge that we could have used to get constitutional reform more broadly onto the agenda. I think Carlos has just kind of explained how the Chilean left came to convince the rest around the constitution. The second thing about Chile is that I think the diversity of the left, the fact that it's got a communist party in it, that is one of the strongest communist parties in the world today, I would say. The fact that it's got other parties that are part of that left, the humanist parties, various socialist parties and so on, actually means that there's plenty of oxygen for new ideas. No one dominates, no one overshadows, no one decides who gets to be excluded. You can't do what the right wing of the British left has done just now with Jeremy Corbyn and the Corbynistas in the Labour movement. You can't do that in Chile because there's a whole ecosystem of left-wing movements and political parties. And I think one of the lessons for the UK is that diversity isn't necessarily weakness. Diversity, the Chilean example shows, when you're united around methods and goals, can be stronger than unity that is essentially about hegemony of one over the others. So that's another thing. There was a question about imperialism and the new left and so on. I think perhaps I ought to rephrase this. I think it's not that they're unaware of the existence of imperialism. Boric has got very strong views on issues like Zionism, for example, and imperialism in general. I think it's more a lack of awareness of the modern forms that imperialist action takes in the third world. And so they don't recognize imperialist action when it's happening in places like Cuba or Nicaragua, because they don't understand that this is how they do coups today. They don't call it Pinochet anymore. What they do is they have the National Endowment for Democracy, the International Republican Institute, various foundations, they've got private enterprise, it's all privatized. It's like a neoliberal structure of regime change. And that's how it functions. On Allende, I'm afraid you'd have to refer to my book. So this, Salvador Allende, Revolutionary Democrat, 2nd edition forthcoming. But I would actually argue that it wasn't, Allende's fundamental weakness was in the dynamics of his coalition. the fact that they didn't really agree on what the purpose of his government was. Allende and the Communist Party and an element of the Socialist Party believed that it was to create the basis for a transition to socialism. And another group of socialists and inside and outside that coalition believed that that government had the role of smashing the old state and moving into a classic kind of revolution straight away. And his inability to deal with that is what killed him. And if you look at Corbyn, I would also say Corbyn's fault wasn't that his strategy was wrong. It was that he had a fifth column in the Labour Party that killed him off. He was, if anything, his mistake is probably that he didn't act to demobilize his internal opposition before the wheels before the real pressure of the system began to tell on him. So I think, those are, the points that I would have in relation to those questions.
Thank you very much, Comrade. We've opened a whole can of worms there again with Corbyn and PR. Well, we could go on all night with this really interesting questions, I think. And actually, I think I find it very inspiring that the working class in Chile does take these questions seriously, which is, as you say, there's a huge problem with there not being a written constitution in Britain. They don't know their own rights. That's true. You can't look it up anywhere. So it's by court case almost. You have your rights changed, taken away, amended in the House of Lords. That's just currently going on with the crime bill, etc. It's a shambles, and it is really disempowering the working class. And yes, the left unfortunately does not understand how important it could be to actually fight for a constitution. That's like, it's not for us. We fight for higher wages. We don't talk about the Queen. We don't talk about all these things, when in fact, that's actually what we have to do if we are wanting to get closer to socialism. Because unless the working class takes all these issues seriously from top to bottom of society, I think we're in serious trouble and we're not going to get there. So I really enjoyed this session. I think it was fantastic. Opened up, as I say, a lot of kind of worms towards the end, but a discussion on PR, I think, is probably the next big debate we should have, because that is another very interesting question. Thank you very much for the 3 speakers for attending. Thank you everybody for coming along tonight. And we hope to see you soon. Next Thursday, we're starting a new education series on abolition, where we're looking at different aspects of capitalist society. Again, similar to what we discussed actually today. What could a different society look like without police, without the army, without money, without patriarchy, etc. So that should be quite inspiring, I think, to look forward to. Thank you very much, comrades. Have a good evening and good night. Bye-bye.